What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are going to be breaking down 5 players that I'm avoiding currently in 2024 fantasy football drafts, as well as 2024 fantasy football mock drafts. These are just players when they're on the board that I just don't feel 100% great about, that maybe I'm seeing other drafters out there a little bit higher on overall. So we're going to break down why I don't like these players, why I'm avoiding them, why I think you should consider avoiding them moving into the season as well. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way in. Other than that, if you guys have any fantasy football questions, drop them down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video. All right, first on the list, I've got wide receiver Malik Neighbors, rookie wide receiver Malik Neighbors for the New York Giants. And I've talked about this throughout my streams and stuff this year. I don't like Malik Neighbors at his current ADP. We look on Underdog, he's going at an ADP of 27.1. Then you look over on the sleeper app, he's going at an ADP of 38 overall. It's just a really steep price to pay for an unproven rookie who I do think is a great prospect. I am a fan of Malik Neighbors. I think he's going to have a good career, but I just don't think his ceiling is that high in this offense with the quarterback play that we can expect out of Daniel Jones, right? And I think when you look on the board, like you look at sleeper, for example, you've got players like DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, George Pickens, Christian Kirk, all going after him. I would draft all of those players before I would draft Malik Neighbors. And you look over on Underdog, you've got players going after him, such as Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Michael Pittman, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, and a couple of the other names that I just mentioned. I mean, Pickens, Cooper, Higgins, Christian Kirk. I would draft all those players before I would draft Malik Neighbors. I feel better about all those players going in the following season than I do Malik Neighbors. Now, if Malik Neighbors was like consistently going in the 4th round, maybe I'd feel like I would be more willing to take more shots on him. He's still going to be a wide receiver 1 for the Giants. And I say it all the time, bad offenses still produce good fantasy players. I think in full PPR, Malik Neighbors is probably going to be fine. Like, I'm not saying he's going to have a bad season or anything. He will be the focal point of this Giants offense, but just don't forget, this Giants offense can look really different. Saquon Barkley's not there anymore to take, the defensive pressure off of the passing game, right? Like, the passing game has to perform, and like Devin Singletary, I don't really know is going to be able to get that done on a consistent basis. And like, you look back to Daniel Jones last year, the stats were just awful. I'm not going to break them down. Even when you go back to the previous season, although he finished as the QB9 in fantasy, a lot of that came from the quote unquote rushing upside that Daniel Jones had in 2022. Over 700 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, which is just kind of mind blowing to think about Daniel Jones doing that. When you look at the passing numbers, 15 passing touchdowns to 5 interceptions. And then you look over the course of his career, Daniel Jones has not thrown for more than 15 passing touchdowns since his rookie season in 2019, where he threw for 24. When you look at the turnovers for Daniel Jones has had double-digit turnovers every single season of his career. Then if you break it down on a deeper scale, it's just really bad, okay? So I just don't feel great about Malik Neighbors, where he's going at his current ADP. I just think when we look at things with Daniel Jones at quarterback, when we look at this offense as a whole, I don't feel great about Malik Neighbors. I don't think his ceiling is going to be super high in his rookie season. So for me, I'm currently passing on Malik Neighbors. Next up on the list, we've got Tyler Lockett. And I know we're going to start moving into some later round players here, but I still think it's important to identify later round players as potential avoid players too. So Tyler Lockett, an ADP of 103.9 on Underdog, an ADP of 121.2 on the sleeper app. And, basically you're looking at Tyler Lockett in later rounds and saying, well, this is probably the wide receiver 2 for the Seattle Seahawks going into this season. It's a good value at a wide receiver 2, especially in PPR leagues, whatever. And I understand that. I don't think that's 100% wrong, but I also kind of worry here that it might be 100% wrong, and that Jackson Smith and Jigba might really move into that wide receiver 2 spot behind DK Metcalf for the Seattle Seahawks. Then Tyler Lockett gets kind of back out to a wide receiver 3 in this offense. When you look at Tyler Lockett last year, or really from 2022 to 2023, It went from over 1,000 receiving yards to under 900 receiving yards, went from 9 receiving touchdowns to 5 receiving touchdowns. So you break things down last year, just a lot of inconsistencies. We still had one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 double-digit fantasy performances. So about half the season still got you 10 or more fantasy points, but the ceiling was okay here. He still had 2 games or 3 games, excuse me, where he was over 22 fantasy points, but that was just 3 games. So like there's still some life here. There's still some spark. So I get when you're looking at where Tyler Lockett's going, he feels like a really good value. Or you just kind of sitting there like maybe you need another wide receiver in terms of depth. And you're like, I'll just go ahead and take Tyler Lockett because he's here. But I just never really find myself when I'm in that position wanting to draft Tyler Lockett. I don't feel like there's really a lot of that upside that he showed earlier in his career left, especially with Jackson Smith and Jigba in position to really move into that wide receiver 2 spot this year for the Seattle Seahawks. And I think when you look at players going close to his ADP, you look on Sleeper, you got guys like Cortland Sutton, Romeo Dobbs. I'd much rather have one of those 2 guys. Cortland Sutton is the wide receiver 1 for his respective team. And Romeo Dobbs, I know, like, Christian Watson is a guy we look at for upside. Jaden Reed is a player that a lot of fantasy managers are going after. Then Tavion Wicks is a later round guy that people like. But we can't forget about Romeo Dobbs and that Packers offense as well. Then you look a little bit further ahead, there's guys like Jacoby Myers, who is a true wide receiver 2 for the Raiders, and I'm not worried about Brock Bowers taking too much of that target share. And then you go even just a little bit ahead, guys like Rashid Shaheed, Josh Downs, once again, 2 players that I believe will be true wide receiver 2s for their respective teams, both offenses that should be improved this year. And even like a player like Josh Palmer, who, once again, a true wide receiver 2. Then you look a little bit further, another true wide receiver 2 in Brandon Cooks for the Dallas Cowboys. So could be wrong here. Tyler Lockett might literally be the true wide receiver 2 for the Seattle Seahawks this year, but I just think there's a good chance that JSN takes over that role. And you can even wait a round or so and get one of those players that I just mentioned and still come out with the actual value that you're looking for without a drop off. Because don't forget that Tyler Lockett, a very accomplished player, but still getting up there in age at age 31. I just have some doubts, some worries about Tyler Lockett. When he's on the board, I just seem to pass on him, see who kind of falls from those players I just talked about and take one of them. Or I'm just going with a completely different position when he's on the board. So for now, I'm avoiding Tyler Lockett. All right, let's take a look at 1 or 2 running backs and let's talk about Aaron Jones for the Minnesota Vikings. And sometimes you just have off seasons where there's just a player that you just don't want to draft. And for me, that's been Aaron Jones of the Vikings, going from the Packers to the Vikings this year. He's got an ADP of 81.2 on Underdog. You do see him fall quite a bit on Underdog drafts. On the Sleeper app, he's still got an ADP of 59.7, though. So he's going just after players like Joe Mixon and Alvin Kamara, as well as Kenneth Walker. And then right before players like James Conner, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, and Ramondre Stevenson. And I'll just say I would rather have those 4 running backs than Aaron Jones at this current moment. Aaron Jones still showed some upside last year. Don't get me wrong. He came out the huge banger in week 1, 26.7 fantasy points, but then was just hurt off and on, missed some time there, 17 points in week 9. But other than that, under 10 fantasy points in every other game he's started since week 1. And then he didn't really get rolling again until week 15, where he finished with 10 points, 14.5, and 14 points to end the fantasy season. So not awful to end the year, but where was really the upside with Aaron Jones and a very good Packers offense that was really, fighting for playoff positioning at the end of the season last year? And now he's with the Vikings. Like, it's probably going to be Sam Darnold to start the year at quarterback. Maybe a mixture of Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy as the year goes on. Maybe it's just Sam Darnold. We got the Jordan Addison suspension looming. We obviously still have JJ. He's going to do his thing. TJ Hawkinson is hurt. He's probably not going to come back till at least after week 6. So this offense just kind of feels like it's in shambles, and I just don't really see a large amount of red zone opportunities for Aaron Jones at the current moment. I just don't see a lot of upside. Now, you could kind of make the opposite argument that, like, well, the offense is going to have to rely on Aaron Jones. I think that's okay if you believe that. But I just think there's better options at running back in this range going. I think there's more upside in guys like DeAndre Swift. I think there's players in better offenses like David Montgomery. So I'd rather take one of those guys than a player like Aaron Jones. He's just one of those guys this offseason that when he's on the board, I'm avoiding him. And I think as August continues, I'm just going to continue to do so. All right, next up, let's talk about Nick Chubb, currently an ADP of 126.7 on Underdog, ADP of 89.4 on the Sleeper app. I know this is going to upset some of you guys, okay? I've already gotten a lot of heat throughout the offseason about my, distaste in potentially drafting Nick Chubb this year. I'm just not there with Nick Chubb. The reports that we are getting at the moment here in the beginning of August is that there's still ways to go with this recovery time for Nick Chubb. And why would the Browns want to rush Nick Chubb back? Go back and watch that injury from last year. You've got a franchise player like Nick Chubb. There's no reason to rush him back. And I think Nick Chubb is as talented as a running back as there is in the NFL, right? But this is just a bad situation when we're looking at things from a pure fantasy standpoint. And the reason why people are still kind of aggressively drafting Nick Chubb at his ADP is because of what could be. Like if Nick Chubb is fully healthy, then we know what Nick Chubb can do. And people are like, oh, I'm getting a great, this is my RB4, this is my RB5. And think about what Nick Chubb can do. And don't get me wrong, if you're just going to draft Nick Chubb and throw him on your IR, whatever, I'm not going to dispute it. But I just don't find myself making that part of my current strategy. And I really think there's a large chance that Nick Chubb is going to miss a big chunk of time this season because even once Nick Chubb is fully healthy, ready to go, they're not going to rush him back onto the field. Now, the time I'm recording this, Donta Foreman was injured today, seems to have a serious injury. So that puts Jerome Ford as the RB1, a player that I've talked about throughout the entire offseason as a great sleeper. And now we got Pierre Strong at RB2. So maybe there's a little bit more of an emphasis on Nick Chubb getting back on the field. Maybe the Browns go out and sign a free agent running back. We'll have to kind of see what happens because behind Pierre Strong, who has gotten some reps at training camp, you just got Naheem Hines and then just a list of players that I don't think will be relevant. So we'll see what happens. Maybe that puts, a little bit more emphasis on Nick Chubb coming back sooner, but I am just not in a position where Nick Chubb is on the board. I'd rather just take a player who I think is going to get touches right away. And Jerome Ford goes very close in the same range as Nick Chubb. I'd rather just take Jerome Ford. I think he's going to be the starter to actually begin the fantasy season. I think there's a good chance he is getting reps throughout the entire season, even when Nick Chubb comes back, because I just have a bad feeling Nick Chubb is not going to get a full workload this year. Maybe I'm wrong, but for now, I'm just going to continue to avoid him, even at this deeper ADP. All right, last but not least, let's talk about Caleb Williams, which, this is my second rookie on this list. I don't really like to pick on rookies for a void list, but I just think when we look at Caleb Williams' current ADP, I think he's being a little bit overvalued going into this season. And I'm not a Caleb Williams hater. I think he's in a good situation. The offensive line has improved. I think the run game between DeAndre Swift, Herbert, Roshan Johnson will be just fine. Good wide receivers here. Go out and draft Rome Odunze, add Keenan Allen. Already have DJ Moore, who's a great wide receiver one. Good tight ends and Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. But I think there's going to be growing pains in this rookie season for Caleb Williams. I think a lot of people believe that. I think he's going to have a good rookie season as long as everyone stays healthy and he stays healthy. But what is the exact upside in terms of fantasy throughout the season? When you look at players being drafted after him on Underdog, you have Trevor Lawrence, Tua, Jared Goff, Herbert, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, Rodgers, Baker Mayfield, top 10 quarterback last year. Even guys like Deshaun Watson, who some people believe will actually be good this year in fantasy, right? There's just proven players like Goff and Tua, Trevor Lawrence, especially for me. Even some of those later guys like Cousins and Stafford that I would just rather draft, especially at their ADP. If I can sit back and get one of these quarterbacks 2-3 rounds later, I would just rather do that because I feel like they are proven guys in better overall offenses where we already know what to expect, right? You look over on the Sleeper app, it's the same way. Tua goes after Caleb Williams. Jared Goff goes after Caleb Williams. Jaden Daniels, I'd rather take a shot in single quarterback redraft leagues on Jaden Daniels for the upside that he brings to the table in terms of his rushing ability. Not that Caleb Williams didn't rush at all in his college career, but if I can get a Jaden Daniels, an entire round later and then draft a player like Matthew Stafford or Trevor Lawrence and come out of my draft with those two quarterbacks, I just feel better about that than paying a steeper draft price for Caleb Williams. So once again, it's not that I don't believe in Caleb Williams and I don't think he'll have a good rookie season, but good rookie seasons don't always translate to, a quarterback that you can trust week in and week out in fantasy football. And it really just comes down to his ADP, the fact that he's being drafted before players who are proven in fantasy football, who I think at worst bring the same ceiling as Caleb Williams this year. But once again, we haven't seen Caleb Williams in the pro, so we don't even know for sure. But I just think, to be fair, you got to look at guys like Tua, Jared Goff, going after him. They should be getting drafted before Caleb Williams. And if you can wait a round or so and get one of those guys as your first quarterback off the board, I would just much rather do so. So I'm going to continue to avoid Caleb Williams at his current ADP. All right, that'll do it for today's video. There are 5 players that I'm currently avoiding in fantasy football drafts. Let me know down below what you guys thought of today's list. Are you drafting these players? Are you not drafting them? Who are you avoiding currently in drafts? If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do throughout the entire season. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. If you guys have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. Other than that, I'll just say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.